Today, we need to revisit expenses and budgets as we only have about 16 days before you graduate. Now, the last time we talked about budgets, we just talked about just sort of figuring out what our total amount of money was for a budget. Now, that is important, but what we need to totally focus on is the types of expenses because that can help you balance your budget a lot better. Now, in the past, we studied budgets. We studied budgeting. It's very important, and we need to be able to identify different types of expenses. By identifying those expenses that we're talking about, we can discuss ideas with our partners and identify our needs and wants. Now, our partners could be our spouses, it could be our roommates, it could be our buddies that we're living with. Because, when you leave your house, sometimes you can't afford to live on your own. So, guess what? You got to spend wisely. So you're going to find a way to save money. Okay. Now, you as a person will have a job and bills to pay, right? As you transition from being taken care of to taking care of yourself. Now, to help spend your money wisely, you're going to need a budget. Now, remember, a budget is just a strategy or plan to help you save money as well as pay bills and expenses, as we discussed in an earlier lesson in this unit. Right? With budgets, we have two types of expenses that we have, right? Those two budget expenses are things that are called fixed expenses. So these are costs that are the same amount each month, right? Now remember, everything is determined for your budget in terms of month as you get paid bi-weekly, weekly, or monthly. Okay. Now, variable expenses can change from month to month. Okay, now here are some examples of some fixed expenses. All right, a lot of you guys still use cable, sometimes internet, right? Or rent. You have rent, you have mortgage payments, or you have municipal taxes. Now, when you have the concept of a cable bill, I still want you to think of a replacement for cable bills as your internet, as a lot of us are getting our information from the internet nowadays. And that usually is a fixed expense. Now, another example, remember we talked about variable expenses, right? So an example of variable expenses are your gas bill that you pay for your house, okay? Or maybe your gas for your car as you drive back and forth to work, right? Your hydro bills, right? Your food bills, right? Your entertainment. Maybe your entertainment changes from month to month, okay? Now, let's go over some examples. We're going to go over 3 examples. The first example is a heating bill. Now, heating bills are a variable expense. Why do you think heating bills are variable when it's larger than usual? Now, the reason why your heating and bill sometimes changes is because of the season or the homeowner's usage, right? That's what makes it variable. Now, when the temperatures are outside or cold, heating costs increase, whereas in the warmer weather, the heating costs decrease and become much lower. Now, the last thing I need you to understand is that budgets need to be designed to show how much items are vital, okay, and which are optional. The items that we have included in a homeowner's expense, mortgage, or whatever, right? Those things are considered fixed, right? And they are important for the upkeep of your house, such as the food and the heating and the hydro, right? There are other optional items that include entertainment, new clothing, and internet connections, right? Optional items are things that you're going to do without and you'll still survive. So things like your entertainment, you don't need, right? Something like your internet connection you can live with, but you don't actually need because you may have your cell phone for that. So now let's just quickly discuss the concept of vital and optional components, right? So here are a bunch of fixed or variable components, right? And we also want to know whether they are vital or they are not vital. So let's go through each of these and just label them down. So just pause the video and write down whether they are fixed or variable, whether they are optional or vital. So now when we look at all these different things, the gym fees are fixed, the rent is fixed, the newspapers are fixed, right? But you notice the gym fee is optional because you don't need it in order to live. The rent is fixed and it's vital because you need a place to live. The newspapers are fixed, but they're optional because you can always find information elsewhere, right? If you got medicine, it's variable, but it's also vital because it keeps you alive and well, right? And then we also have variable taxes, but they are also vital as you need to pay them, and they are set by the government. Now let's go on to our next thing here. So imagine that a family lives near a bus route, but is very far from work and school. What items might you find in their budget if the money is tight? Now, in larger towns, you frequently have buses that you can take, right? And frequently we either have bus tickets or tokens that allow us to get on the bus, or you would end up with bus passes that you would use for your transportation. So that would be in the budget. That's it. So now let's talk about something very critical, okay? We need to be able to take a look at a person's expenses and understand how their variable expenses can be estimated monthly, right? Okay. Now, let's take a look at Ruth's expenses, right? Ruth's expenses are shown in the table below. So for entertainment, we have basically this amount of money that's spent from January to March, right? We also have clothing spent from here to here, right? We got food, we got cell phone. You'll notice how we set our variable expenses off to one side and kind of list it from month to month in order to give us an idea of how much we could figure out each one of these numbers is. Now, if you look at the fixed expenses, that's something that doesn't change. So we can kind of have those in a column of numbers and titles to the right. So we can kind of total them up. Now, the biggest issue is finding some number that represents the amount of money that we spend monthly, right? So we're going to have to determine a reasonable amount for each variable expense. Now, in order to do that, we have to use a thing called the average. Now, if you recall, for the average, we have to total what we need for what we're focusing on. And then 2, we have to divide by the number of items that we're using, okay? Take, for example, these problems right here. So let's say I want to figure out the entertainment expenses over the months of January to March. So what we need to do is calculate the average, and let me show you how we do that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add up 50 plus 49 plus 55, add them up, and we get this total. And now we have a total of 154. The second stage is to take 154 and divide by 3. So we're literally just going to go 154 divided by 3, and we end up with, and in this case, we take 154 divided by 3, and you get 51.33 for the average. Now, it's very powerful in the sense that when we can calculate the average over the months, we have a better handle of our expenses, because sometimes those expenses go up, sometimes they go down, and then we can use this average to kind of gauge how much we need to pay for our budgets. So that is the last concept that we need to know. When you're doing your budgets for variable expenses, we are going to use averages in order to get our totals for our variable expenses. Now, let's continue and we'll take a look at the final budget, and then we will total with our fixed expenses and variable expenses. Now, if you don't really care about the decimals, this is one of those times where we can actually get rid of them. Not a problem. See how it says it was 51.33? Let's just put $51 overall for this average, right? For the clothing, when we average that, we end up with about $29. So we're just going to round to the nearest dollar in order to make our life easier. And then for food, our rounding is $45 again. And then finally, for the cell phone, we have $39. Now, the key to find our overall amount of money that we spend for this month is given by totaling the fixed expenses and the variable expenses as shown here. So we see in our final budget, we're just going to basically take all of the expenses, and you'll notice that right here, we've literally taken the averages for the fixed expenses. And what we're going to do is we're just going to total our fixed expenses with our variable expenses to get our total amount for the budget. In this case, the budget is $834 a month. All right, and there we go. So the key idea is to make sure that when we're looking at variable costs or variable expenses, we need to take a look at the average of the expenses over a couple of months and use that to our advantage to figure out a general idea of how much our expenses are. And when we do that, we got to round it to the nearest dollar, like we see here. It just makes our work easier. All right. Have a good day, guys. Work is posted.